Good morning, how's it going? So I wanted to talk about landing on a backward traveling leg. Now there's a piece of research out there which I think was Clark 2017, I think that's the right one, talking about a double impulse. And this double impulse is basically what I've been talking about landing on a backward traveling leg for the last, I don't know, about 15 years now. And this piece of research talks about the two forces of gait, so the horizontal force and the vertical forces. Now, something that most people seem to miss out on when they're talking about running is the horizontal force. Now, there has to be a horizontal force, otherwise you wouldn't be able to go that way, go forwards, right? There has to be a horizontal force applied into the ground. Now, the way I describe this is that it happens in three phases. There's a horizontal force, there's a vertical force, and then there's a second horizontal force. So the first one is the backward traveling leg, the landing on the backward traveling leg. And the way that we talk about this, or the way that we describe this in the runner's rehab or in the sling method, is to pull together. Now I'm going to show you what that is. If I just I'm going to flip my camera, if I can. Or maybe I can't. Anyway, I'm going to show you this. So if I have one leg out in front and it's off the ground, if I pull it back, it's coming together. So the two legs go together towards the midline. Okay, so if I have 1 foot behind me and 1 foot in front of me, and I want them to switch direction, which they do, of course, that is a pull together. Now, vice versa, flip that around the other way. I'm going to show you my feet. If I have my feet here and I want this leg to go that way and this leg to go that way, I need to go away. So I need these two legs to go in opposite directions, but in the other way. So one goes forwards and one goes backwards. That's the away. Now, of course, when we run, the foot lands in front of me, and we want it to be landing as it's being pulled backwards. That's the first impulse. Okay, the foot lands. It's an acceleration of the leg into the ground. The second impulse is where my center of mass comes over my foot, over my leg. I hope you could all see that. I couldn't flip my camera around, so I hope you could all see that. So the first impulse is when the foot lands. That's a horizontal impulse. The second is when my body mass comes over, my center of mass comes over the foot that's on the ground. And that is the two impulse model. Okay? Now, if you are not understanding that there needs to be a third, which is a push off the ground, then again, you're missing out on the way that running occurs. And this is what a lot of people miss out on, is the way that it actually occurs, the way that it really actually happens. So you can see this, you can see it with your own eyes. If you watch anybody running and look at pro runners, look at the elite runners, to see the things that we should be doing, to see the things that we want to occur. Don't look at slow runners or injured runners, because they'll do the opposite, right? So they run in a different way, and we can't become a better runner by doing all the things that all the injured runners or all the slow runners do, right? In order to become a better runner, we need to look at doing the things that the better runners do. And we need to understand it. And the first thing that we need to do is just use your eyes, right? See what's in front of you on display from what those elite runners, the pro runners, are actually doing, and start to dissect all of that. And that's literally what we've done in the sling method, is dissect every piece of information that we see visually. So kinematically, that's what we see, and kinetically is the forces that occur, the biomechanics, the kinesiology. The biomechanics is the main thing, but we need to understand that what we see kinematically is the things that anybody can see and identify. You don't need a degree or a master's degree or a PhD to see and describe what it is that you're seeing, right? So anybody can do that, and that's what we do with a kinematic gait analysis. We're looking at what's going on, at what we see, and first thing, we're believing what we see because it's there on video in front of our eyes. We have to believe what we see, and if we believe what we see, then we can start to, at least kinematically, we can start to absorb that information and then kind of use those things that we see in order to train our body and train runners to basically just do it better. Because as I said, you can't become a better runner by doing all the things that the slow and injured runners do, right? So use the information that you see, that you get from all the elite and pro runners, and use it and use it to your advantage, because that's what it's there for. Now, something I said yesterday about increasing the stride length or working. Stride length is the first thing that deteriorates as we age. And that's generally because, as we age, our muscle power, our muscle force goes down. It decreases. It's not because we necessarily get tighter or restricted. It's because the amount of force that we produce in our gait cycle goes down because the muscle force reduces, right? So what we want to work on is the ability to produce that force and produce it in the right place at the right time with the correct muscle and the correct muscles in coordination with one another. Coordination is a big thing in running, and it's why a lot of runners are constantly injured, because they lack the coordination, the skill of running. So what we do in the sling method is we work on the skill of producing the running movement. And we treat running as a skill because it is, right? If you don't treat it as a skill, then you're going to, first thing, you're just going to go wrong. You're just going to lose track of the things that you need to work on. And this is what we see all the best runners in the world doing all their running drills, doing all of their drills to keep them skillful in running. It's not about how strong you are. It's about how skillful you are in coordinating the running movement. So when you coordinate the running movement, your economy of movement actually gets better. It improves, right? After that, your efficiency gets better, or vice versa, or maybe at the same time. Because when you're working on it as a skill and you're doing the right movements and training those movements, you're going to improve how the force translates through your body and into the ground. Now, I'm going to take a step back and we're going to talk just again about those two impulses. So if I am not creating the first impulse, i.e. I'm not accelerating my foot into the ground in a backwards direction, so landing on a backward traveling leg, as I call it, that's the easiest way to describe it. And it's relative to my center of mass, relative to your center of mass, relative to the runner's center of mass. So I'm pulling my leg back. That's the together action. We do a lot of that in the sling method because that is the skill. That's the biggest skill. And when you look at this study, I think it was Clark, as I said, Clark et al. 2017, they talk about this as a skill. And they talk about it as something that most runners don't do. And when they say most runners, remember, one big marathon, like the London Marathon, 50,000 people running that marathon. Most of them won't be landing on a backward traveling leg. Most of them will be suffering recurring injuries. So that, again, that's lack of skill, lack of coordination. It's not about lack of strength, right? It's not about lack of strength and we know it's not about lack of strength because every single one of those runners could run faster. They could sprint, essentially, right? They could sprint. And if you can sprint, you're already strong enough to run slower. It's kind of obvious, really. It's like if I can do a bench press with 100 kilos, then I know I can do a bench press with 60 kilos for 10 or 12 or 15 or maybe even 20 reps. So a sprint would be the maximal exertion, the maximal power of the muscles in a gait movement. Okay, so if I know that I can already run faster, then I know I can run slower for longer, right? But if I'm doing it in an unskilled way, then it's not going to be efficient, it's not going to be economical, and I'm probably, most likely, going to end up getting injured at some point. So working on that skill is really important. Now, when we land on the backward traveling leg, like I said, we create that first impulse. And there's a very, very, very important point of creating that first impulse. Because running, and this is going to be the second thing I talk about, running is a reflex reactive movement. Now I'm going to kind of give you a little anecdote. If I choose to pick up a dumbbell and do a bicep curl, I'm controlling that movement the whole time. There's no reflex responses there because it's slow. All right, there's no reaction to the ground. There's no ground reaction force, which there is in running. So there's a huge amount of reflexes and response to force, response to joint range of motion, responses to the ground, which has to occur in running, which doesn't occur, excuse me, got a bit of a sore throat this morning, which doesn't occur in other sort of gym-based movements because they're so slow. So, with that being said, that first impulse is so important because what it does is it stretches the fascial tissue. And when we stretch the fascial tissue, what we get is a response, a reflex response to that stretch. And that's really, really key, because when we get that reflex response to the stretch, what we get is all of the correct muscles contracting, or even just indeed muscles contracting to control where the bones go. Okay, so to control range of motion at joints. Now, when we get that happening, we are going to get a faster response. We're going to get a very protected response because when muscles contract, it keeps joints and tendons safe. But only if they occur by that reflex response. So landing on a backward traveling leg creates the first impulse, the first impulse into the ground. And then the second impulse is when your center of mass meets the foot or goes over the foot. That's the second impulse. So there's those two impulses. And when the second impulse arrives, you should be at the lowest point in your gait cycle. So you should be down. So all of your joints should be flexed. Hip flexed, knee flexed, ankle flexed. And the toes should be relaxed. Now, there's two things there that I want to talk about. Three things there that I want to talk about. The knee must be allowed to bend and the quads must be loading. But the hamstrings are in control and the adductors are in control because they're pulling the leg backwards when you land. And the second thing is the hip must be able to bend and it must start to internally rotate. The knee and the femur must turn inwards relative to the pelvis. So that means the pelvis must be swinging over the top of that standing leg. Now the third thing that must happen is that the foot and ankle must pronate and the toes must stay long. Now a lot of people have these kind of clenched up toes. They're like hammer toes. And they're doing exercises which don't treat the toes as levers. Now we want those toes to be long and sort of partially splayed. That way, as the foot rolls over and we get pronation and then supination in the rear foot, so the heel starts to rise up off the ground, what we've got is essentially a longer lever. And we've got a longer lever with all the fascial tissues, so the plantar fascia, the ligaments across the forefoot, and the Achilles, all in a stretched, loaded situation. Now, when they're stretched and loaded, what that does is it keeps them very safe, because the muscles are contracted and ready to support the whole of the foot and ankle and the leg, and then ready to create the third impulse. And like I said at the very beginning, the third impulse gets created as the foot is behind you, so that you can then push backwards to push your center of mass forwards. Okay, so we've got together where the foot hits the ground in front of you and essentially gets pulled backwards. We've got the second impulse where your center of mass comes over your foot, so creating a vertical load. And then we've got the third impulse, which is a lower level impulse, where the foot is behind you, the toes are extended to allow the foot to roll over itself, so the heel goes over the toe, or goes up and over the forefoot, and then you can push the ground backwards, you can push against the ground, thus thrusting your center of mass forwards. Now, all of your body weight is in front of your foot at that point, or at least it should be, to be able to create the third impulse, which is the backward push off the ground. And when you create that third impulse, that's when the stride length occurs. So again, we've got those three impulses: landing, mid stance, and then toe off, or just pre-toe off and toe off. And that's the three impulses, or the three forces, that we're training when we train with the runner's rehab and the basic gait. So in training through the runner's rehab and the basic gait, and all of the specific mobility drills that we have in the swing method, what we're doing is we're preparing all of those tissues to be exposed, right? All of those tissues need to be exposed so that they can be loaded. If a tissue doesn't get exposed, i.e. if a joint doesn't have range of motion, then it doesn't get exposed, right? So something else has to basically pick up the slack and do all the work. And if the something else is doing all the work, it's probably going to end up injured because it's getting overloaded, right? So what we do is we train all of these positions isometrically, so there's no movement, there's very little movement. We train them isometrically because that is a really good way, a really great way to train the nervous system, to train the fascial system, to be able to load that position. And when we load the position, we get the tissues to accept the load and then create the adaptation. Okay? And that's all the things that we're doing in the runner's rehab and the basic gait. All right? And as I said, all the mobility drills, etc., etc. But you have to be, you have to train those tissues correctly. You have to train them, at least maybe not correctly. Correctly is kind of maybe a little bit overreaching, but you have to start training them in a certain way, and that allows them to be loaded. That allows them to be adapting. All right. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was training the abdominals, training the abdominal region, so the obliques, the abs, the transverse abdominis. Now, remember, these muscles are very, very reactive. They're very, very responsive. So if ever you've heard somebody say, or a trainer or a coach say, pull your abs in, pull your stomach in, what you're doing there is preloading a muscle, preloading the system in a way that never occurs when we move. You don't run around going, brace. I looked like I was doing something silly then. You don't run around in a preloaded way, otherwise you'd never move. When you're contracting or pulling something in, specifically your abdominals, first thing you're doing is restricting your breathing. Second thing you're doing is forcing your ribs and your pelvis to become one kind of stuck system, which they need to be able to separate so that we can rotate them independently of one another. And thirdly, they need to be reactive to load and reactive to range of motion and reactive to the movement, and then contracting. Now, if they're preloaded and contracted the whole time, they can't do any of that. So don't pull them in. Don't do it that way. All right? You'll never, in any of my videos that I've done where I'm teaching any of my exercises, the swing method exercises, I've never ever said pull your abs in, brace the abs, brace your stomach. All right? I've never said that. We never create the C-curve shape in the lumbar spine. We never do any of those things. Those things do not help you run better. They don't help you coordinate the movement better. All they do is serve to work against you in the same way that clenching the toes and grabbing the ground with the toes actually serves to preload the foot, which is not good. A gentle press down of the big toe is okay, just to kind of make you aware of the big toe. But we don't want to drive that big toe down into the ground, because again, you preload the arch and then you take all of the strain on the muscle, which is very bad. We want the muscles to do what they need to do in response to a stretch. And when I say in response to a stretch, I mean in response to a movement which creates load, which then creates a stretch in those tissues. Because we want muscles need to respond to load, and it happens so fast when you're running, so 3 times a second roughly. You can't respond to load that quickly. Your reflexes aren't that fast, and there's you'd wear your nervous system out. You get nervous system overload. It just doesn't work. It can't work. It will never work. It's never happened that way, so don't train it that way, right? So, like I said, first thing is understanding those 3 impulses. First one is the landing on a backward traveling leg, which then preloads loads the system effectively to respond. Second is the vertical load, that when the center of mass comes over the foot, that's the vertical load. And then the third one is the second horizontal load, which is where you push off the ground and your swinging leg is coming through. Now, when you push off the ground, it's not very powerful. There's very little power there. The power is in the swing leg and the turn of the body and the turn of the pelvis. There is not power in the stance leg, in the standing leg, in order to push you very hard. There's a tiny amount of push, very small amount of push. Okay, so all of these jumping up squat movements that are pushing against a heavy weight, it doesn't work. It's the wrong movement in the wrong place at the wrong time by the wrong muscles in the wrong direction. Okay, so it cannot work. All right, it doesn't work that way. And that's the reason why you could triple your squat. You could triple the amount of weight that you could squat, and your running wouldn't see a 3-fold increase or a 3-fold increase in pace, should I say? Right? It just doesn't work. Doesn't work that way. It's the right muscle, the right place, the right time, the right force, the right direction, the right range of motion, the right coordination with all the other joints and muscles acting. Okay? That's the reason why we do things the way we do in the swing method, and we don't just copy everything else. And the reason why we get different result when other things are failing to get the result. Right? There has to be that acknowledgement of what's actually occurring. So use your eyes, see what's going on with your eyes, and then start to dissect and understand the differences between how a runner who's running, say, a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 minute mile is running compared to a runner who's running let's just say a 6-minute mile, or even a 5-minute mile, or even down to a 30-minute mile, which is what these elites are running the marathon at. The men, I'm talking about elite men here. Elite women a little bit slower pace, but still the same gait, essentially. Slightly different joint angles, but very, very similar, and the action is still the same. All right. So yeah, just seeing how these differences are, and saying and understanding that if I train the same way that all the injured slow runners are training, I'm going to get what all the injured slow runners are getting. If I want to get faster and less injured, what I have to do is start understanding the differences and then training my body to move in the way that the elite runners move. Right? And you can do that visually, like I said, kinematically, or you can then start to get down into the weeds and looking at the kinetics and the forces in play and the positions and the joint angles, and that's when you're getting into the sling method. And as I've said before, you don't have to know it all. You don't have to know all of that, but doing it allows you to know all of that because you're actually doing it. And the difference is that I might consciously know what's going on, and I might subconsciously know what's going on. One is that I just do it and I don't worry about understanding it all. The second is that I do it and then I work on understanding and learning it all, right? And you don't have to do that. I think a lot of the overwhelm comes in letting go of what you've previously done to then learn a new way, right? So, yeah, 3 impulses. First one, when the foot lands on a backward traveling leg. Second one, when the center of mass goes over the foot. Third one, when you push away behind you. It's a very small one. First 2 are bigger. All right. If you're landing on a forward traveling leg, then what you're essentially getting is a big second impulse as a first impulse. So you're negating the first impulse and you're combining it as one. So you're getting this huge primary impulse and no secondary. All right. And you're probably negating everything else in there as well. All right. Big difference, massive difference. So big of a difference that when you see it and you understand it and you accept it, you can see why all the slow injured runners are slow and injured, and why all the fast runners are fast and not injured, and running hundreds of miles per week and not getting injured, right? And you can see why you don't need big, strong muscles in order to do it, because having big, strong muscles is irrelevant. In fact, it goes against you in more ways than one, because, you know, big, strong muscles negate the fascial system because they take over the role of the fascial system, which is very bad for, firstly, for the muscles, secondly, for the fascial system. It's just not how it works. It's just not how it works. All right? Have a great day. If you've got any questions, of course, post them below. If you like this video and you found it interesting and, you know, opened your eyes to something, please give me a like, maybe even share it so that other people can find it. It would help massively. All right? Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.